So I have been asked to give an explanation of the mode settings for our uprated rider aids package. So I thought the easiest way to do this would be to show you on the screen in the YRC settings. So you can see here we have power mode A, B, C and D. Well, we set this up so that you have a power mode 1 with A, 2 with B, 3 with C and 4 with D. Power mode 1, 2 and 3 are all full power settings. Power mode 1 has the most engine braking. Power mode 2 has 2% less engine braking. Power mode 3 has 4% less engine braking. And power mode 4 is a wet map. Really simple. If we move along. Traction control. So the old settings on a standard ECU were quite simple. 1 was the least amount of traction, 9 was the most. This has been rewritten so that setting number 5 is the same as the old setting number 1. Setting 4 is 10% less traction. Setting 3 is 20% less. Setting 2 is 30% less. And setting 1 is 40% less. If you go the other direction, 6, 7 and 8 and 9 are all increased from standard. So essentially you've got, that's the equivalent of 1, so this would be 6 is the equivalent of 2, 7 is the equivalent of 3 and 8 is the equivalent of 4, 9 is the equivalent of 5. So yeah, essentially the standard map is far too intrusive, so this is a much better option for racers in particular. So now let's move on to slide control. Slide control, you've got 3 settings. These function exactly the same as standard. 1 is the least intrusive, is the least amount of slide. 3 is the most amount of slide. Choose your options there. Launch control has been rewritten so that setting number 1 is now limit free. Setting number 2 is about 12,000 RPM if I remember rightly. Depending really, I don't use launch control myself, but for those of you who do, I'm sure you'll understand, and the no limit was probably basically the upper rev limit at 14,200. Might be where you're starting from. Braver than me if you do it that way though. So quick shifter, we have also rewritten the quick shifter maps. So we have 2 maps in there. Quick shifter setting number 2 is what we've written for a standard gearbox. Quick shifter setting number 1 is what we've written for a Nova close ratio ultra lightweight gearbox. Because the gearbox itself has less sliding mass, you can spend less time doing the quick shift, so it's a shorter map. If you run that with a standard gearbox, you will cause damage to the dogs because it is a very short kill time. And then finally, we have lift control, anti-wheelie. So this has been completely rewritten so that it kills in a very different way. Cuts in gradually, basically killing 1 cylinder when the front wheel comes up a fraction, 2 with a little bit more, 3 with a little bit more, and 4 when it gets really high. The original mapping cut all 4 in one go, so it was a little bit too much. Number 1, setting number 1 is for the Brave. There's virtually no traction control, no anti-wheelie until you get over around about 30, 40 degrees. So it's quite a long way up before it does anything. I would recommend that you use setting number 2 if you're an experienced rider. This has got the nice way of cutting the cylinders so that it doesn't bring the front down too hard, but also it has a decent level of anti-wheelie in there, so it does keep the front wheel down a little bit easier. And setting number 3, if you're uncomfortable with the front wheel coming up at all, setting number 3 will help you by keeping the front wheel down even lower. Obviously the unfortunate thing with anti-wheelie is the more it cuts in, the less drive you get, and therefore the slower you are at the end of the straight because you lose your drive off the corner. So you need it to cut in as little as possible to get the best from it. Still, hopefully that explanation makes sense.